Every user and maintenance assistant has to be assigned to one or more user groups. Now, user groups serve two purposes. The first is to dictate the level of access that user has. So if I make Greg a member of the administrators group, it gives him access to everything, including things like adding or deleting users. The other extreme is if I make him a member of the technicians group. Now, technicians have a very restricted set of permissions. All they can really do is log in and check their work orders, their assigned assets, and submit work requests. Managers are kind of in the middle. Managers can access most of the left menus, except for the settings. So assigning a level of access is the first point of user groups. The second would be to help organize workflow. So what I mean by this is, let's say you're trying to assign someone to a work order. You can either assign an individual user, such as Jeff or Daryl, or you can assign an entire user group. So I can say anyone who's a member of the technicians group is assigned to complete the work order. Okay, so in that sense, it's sometimes useful to create a user group even though there's no permissions assigned to it, just to help organize workflow. So you can create a user group that's called night shift, and then add users to that group and assign a work order to the night shift group. Okay, so user permissions are also additive, which means that if I assign someone to multiple groups, they'll get the combined permissions of those two groups. So if I make Jeff a member of the technicians group and the logistics group, he'll have all the permissions that are inherent in the technicians group and all the permissions of the logistics group. It'll behave as if he's in both groups. So building a user group from scratch is actually a fairly involved process and requires just a lot of time commitment and testing. So I'll walk you through the process of building a really simple one. And I'll call this group Technicians with Reports. So the point of this group is I'm going to take a user like Jeff, and Jeff's in the Technicians group, but I want him to be able to access the Reports menu. So what I'll do is I'll create a custom group called Technicians with Reports, and to this group I'm only going to add the permissions you need to access reports, and then I'm going to add him to both groups. So I'll have the permissions of the Technicians group and the permissions of the Technicians with Reports group. So I'll start building the group. There are essentially two tiers of permissions. The first is menu permissions, which is all the left menus you see here. And the second is more detailed. So first we'll add the right menus that Jeff needs. And for this group, again, we're going to keep it really simple and just make it so we can access reports. So because he's in the technicians group already, I don't need to make sure he can log on or off or access the dashboard. Those menu permissions are all included in the other group he's a part of. So for this group, I'm just going to highlight the reports and also the reports submenu. Okay, now page permissions are a lot more complicated to deal with. And this is where you really have to test out to make sure that the user group is behaving as you want them to. So it's a very long list of the different pages in Maintenance Assistant. Just for schedule maintenance, there's 7 or 8. So this one will be for the generic schedule maintenance page, and then each tab in a schedule maintenance also has its own set of permissions. Okay, so what I'll do here is I'm going to look for reports, and I'm going to give Jeff access to the report page. Sorry, not Jeff. I'm going to give the group access to the report page, as well as the save and print button. Okay, and that's really much all he needs. Now there's a bit of a distinction between report and reports. So reports is the list of reports, whereas report is the individual report once you've opened it. So I want him to access the list of reports, but I don't need him to be able to create new ones or edit existing ones. So all I'll do for this is make so he can access it. Now, in order to test this, the first thing I'm going to do is make sure that Jeff is in the new group. So I'll go ahead and add him to the Technicians with Reports group and save. And the second thing I'll do is log in as Jeff to make sure the changes have actually taken effect and they're behaving the way I want. Okay, so we can see that Jeff still has the permissions that are given to him by the Technicians group. See the dashboard and his assigned work orders. And he also has this new menu called Reports, as well as the Reports submenu. Okay, so these are the menu permissions I enabled. Then accessing the page is the page permissions. Okay, so I'll search for an overdue work orders report and see if that'll run properly. Okay, so in this case, it works fine. Enabling reports for a user group is a pretty straightforward process, and there are certainly much more complicated use cases. So the main thing to remember is that you need to test these changes pretty thoroughly. So an easier way to do this than logging out and logging back in is the test user every single time. So in this case, I had to make the change as an administrator, log off, log back in as Jeff, and test. And a bit of a quicker way to do that is I'll have a different browser program. So here I have Chrome, whereas before I was using Safari. So I'll log in as Jeff under Chrome. And this way, I can make changes in Safari as an administrator. So I can update the user group in the Safari program, and then switch over to Chrome where Jeff is logged in. All I have to do is refresh, and the changes take effect, and then I can see whether or not they worked.